Hello, I'm Robbie, and in the Da Nang Vietnam Cultural Exchange Centrum we have a lot of children coming for the art gallery or just to play some games. Among other games, they love to play chess. Well, they want to learn to play it, but we have other activities. There are good chess clubs in Da Nang, but they just want to try it and to play it. So I decided to make a few videos so they can learn the basic, or their parents can do so, and then they can teach their own children. In the previous video I explained how the pieces move and how to give checkmate at the end of a game, and now we go on with more ways of giving checkmate. However, looking back at the previous videos, I suppose you also saw that I sometimes have problems with the English. I have taught chess for about 50 years or more, but in Dutch. So I often automatically want to continue in Dutch. I'm not really used to talking about chess in English, and I still have a cold. In this video I will discuss the basic of pawn promotion and also some examples of typical king attack during the middle game. As in the previous video, I only use diagrams, even though it's more convenient to just show it on a real board. The reason is very simple. When you play a game, it's not allowed to just to try something out. You have the position in front of you and you have to try out the possibilities in your mind while talking to yourself. By working with diagrams and explaining the considerations, you learn to work from what is possible, and in the game you have to play with the piece you are touching. So you have to try out the moves in your mind before you play your move on the board. We will see how a position like this with white can move. It can be won by white, or with black to move, how it can end in a draw. In the second part we will show some elements of checkmate attack. In particular, weakenings of the king's position play an important role. Hence the advice: do not play too quickly with the pawns that protect the king. In this diagram we see at first sight equal position where there is not much going on, except that both players apparently opted for a long castling. But that's an optical illusion, because a few moves later white is checkmated. Black does not want to exchange queens and plays one queen a8 to c6. The white pawn on c3 is attacked twice, by the king from c6 and by the bishop from h7. The pawn is only defended by the king. An extra defense is also not possible. The wisest thing is probably to play the bishop or the knight to f5, so that the bishop h7 is blocked. However, white plays his pawn to c3. Then he cannot be checkmated on c3, and he also attacks the bishop on b4. So we have now this position. Do you see that by moving the c pawn to c3, the king can't run away to b1 anymore due to the bishop on h7? So there isn't much left for the king's castle. No defenders, and now white is weakening by playing the pawn that is defending the king. Black sees his possibilities and that his pieces are well positioned for attack. He may have thought of former world champion Michael Tall, who had a great love for sacrificing pieces, with the thought: I only have to checkmate my opponent before he can use the extra pieces he has. And so the game continues with queen c6. Queen c6 takes the pawn on c3. The white king has nowhere to go, nor can he put a piece between it, so the only move left is to capture the queen. Pawn takes queen c3, and next black plays bishop b4 to a3, checkmate. But as promised, we will look first on how we can win that one position with the pawn. In our first video we saw that the pawn can only capture diagonally forward. So it can only attack pieces that are on the nearby lines. We also saw that because of this, the square in front of the pawn in the direction the pawn is moving is called the blocking square. Now, if we look at the diagram we started with, we see that the black king is on the pawn line and one of the blocking squares. In the second diagram, we see the black king also on the blocking square, and it's even the promotion square. And let's start with this draw situation, because the black king can go nowhere. How does this situation arise? If white wants to win, he must free the blocking squares and try to keep them free. So playing the pawn d4 to d5 is not wise, because then black can play king d6 and he is perfectly positioned there to block the pawn. White then has no choice but to play king to d4, and we'll have to try to free the blocking square on the next move by playing either king to e5 or to c5. Black of course doesn't know where white is going and therefore simply plays backwards to d7. If white now plays king to e5, black takes an opposition with king e7. And if white plays king c5, black responds with king c7. If the white king moves back to the 4th rank, black can move back to the blocking square at d6. And the next move he moves back square to d7. And when white then plays to the 5th rank, the black king takes the opposition again. Instead of moving the king back a row, white can also move his pawn forward to d6, after which the black king will go to the blocking square d7 again. The white king can then move alone to d5 again, otherwise black will take the pawn, after which black takes a step back to square d8, from where he can take the opposition again. Eventually the situation comes that the pawn is on d6, the white king on e6, and the black king then takes the opposition on e8. Now the white king can move back a row, after which the black king will stand on the blocking square d7 again. Or white play his pawn forward, after which black goes to d8. White must continue to protect his pawn and then place king to d6, and it is a draw. So, now that we have seen the principle of blocking squares and taking the opposition in practice, it's logical that from the starting position the white king himself will stand on the blocking square and take the opposition from there. For example, if black plays king c7, then white plays king e6, and we see that he frees the blocking squares d5, d6 and t7 with this. The winning is now simple, well, quite simple, but must be done carefully. When black keeps the king on the 7th rank or brings it to the 6th rank with advances to the pawn d5, white just let the pawn go to d5 and just walk to d8. If black plays his king to c8 or b8, then white plays king e7, and then the pawn has a completely free path to d8. If black plays king d8, then white takes the opposition and plays king d6. If the black king now goes to c8, and then white plays king e7, black plays king 8, then white plays king 7, and in both cases the pawn can advance freely to d8. So when the pawn arrives on d8, it can promote to the rook or a queen, and as we saw in the previous video, it's not a problem to checkmate the black king. It does not always come to an endgame. Sometimes there's suddenly an opportunity to checkmate the opponent's king. The simple situation will immediately remind you of the checkmate with 2 or with rook and a king. The principle was that the king stood at the edge of the board and that the squares in front of him were also inaccessible. In our example, because of rook or because of the other king. This was a position in which we checkmate the other king with the rook. But now suppose that those squares in front of the king, f7, g7 and h7, are occupied by his own pawns, as you see at this diagram. If we now give check with the rook from e1 to e8, then the king is also checkmated. There are many variations on this mating, which is called the corridor mate. Here we cannot give checkmate on e8 because the king protects the square. But after bishop f2 c5 check to the king must go to g8 and then follows rook e8 checkmate. In this case, square e8 is even covered twice by the rook and by the king. But that doesn't help either. First, the king is chased away. Queen goes to e7 check. The king must go to g8. Then queen e7 gives check on e8. The rook d8 takes the queen on e8. And rook from e1 takes the rook on e8 checkmate. This position, you might think, well, white can just take with the rook from f1, takes the pawn on f7, and there is an undectable mate on one of the next moves. But usually there are multiple pieces on the board. So let's add some black pieces. Take your time to look carefully what's on the board and what possibilities they both have. And now we go back to the move that did look very good in the previous diagram. But now we see that after one rook f1, f7, black responds with queen, g5, g2, and white is checkmated. This means that white has no time for preparing moves, which rook f1 takes f7 is a preparing move. White can only win by playing forcing moves, and in this case white should play queen c4, f7 check. If the king goes to h8, then follows queen, takes rook f8 and is checkmated. If black takes the queen, then follows rook f8, takes queen f7, but now rook c7 gives on c8 check. Queen g5 goes to d8. The rook from c8 takes the queen on d8. Rook f7 goes to f8. The rook on d8 takes the rook f8 checkmate. Of course, this corridor check can also take place on the side edge of the chessboard. Here in this diagram, white starts with knight f4 to g6 check. The king cannot go to g8 because of the bishop on b3, so black must take the knight. The peon takes knight g6, and after which white checkmates black with rook b1 h1 checkmate. Here we see a variation, now with the knight and the queen. Knight c6, e7 check. The king goes to h8. Queen bishop 1 takes a pawn on h7. The king takes the queen on h7 and the rook from a1 gives to h1 checkmate. Be careful to understand what you are doing, because when the knight checks on e7, white creates an alternative corridor mate, because due to the knight on e7 the black king can go to g8 and g6. Next, only the protecting pawn needs to be removed, and we do that with the queen sacrifice, after which we can give checkmate with rook on h1. If you remember the queen sacrifice on h7 and start with that, then black can prevent checkmate after knight c7, e7 by playing the pawn to g6 or the king to h6. This is possible because in this situation the knight move to e7 doesn't give check. So it's not a forcing move. When the king fortress is weakened, it gives opportunities to attack it. Because we often play the pawns on b7, g7, b2 and g2 to b6, g6, b3 and g3 to develop the bishops to b7, g7, b2 and g2. Doing so is called fianchetto. From that position, the bishop is looking at the center. However, there might come a problem. A fianchetto formation in front of the king can become a weakness when we do not have the bishop there anymore. Like in this example, there's no black bishop on g7 anymore, so white can play easily his bishop to f6, and then he plays rook takes h7, and the next move rook h7, h8. Interesting is that it doesn't help when black plays first h7, h5. Then white plays also rook h4 takes h5, g6 takes rook h5, rook h1 takes h5, and the next move is rook h5, h8, checkmate. Of course, only if black hasn't moved to defend. We also have to look carefully for that. The fianchetto bishop on b2 is also aiming at g7 in this diagram, and this is often very dangerous. Rook g1 takes g7 check. King g8 goes to h8, that is the only possibility. Rook g7 gives a double check by playing rook g8. Now the king has to take that rook, and the next move is rook r1 g1 mate. It's very important here that white plays rook gf. This is a double check, and black can only solve this by this treat by capturing the rook. If white were to play to rook to g2, black could easily capture the bishop on b2 or play f6, and then there is no more check. This way of attacking by chasing the king to a square that is covered by an enemy piece is very efficient. At first the king is still protected by the enemy rook, but as soon as white plays the rook away, which we call discovery check, the king is in check and he must answer that check. In the meantime, in this case, the rook can attack another piece, and because the king has to defend itself, the other piece cannot defend itself. It's one of the tactical possibilities that are interesting for another video. The next diagram shows a variation that is confusing for beginners, especially when they have practiced well to look at the value of the pieces. Take a good look at the diagram, and now white plays queen f1 takes the knight f6. Wow! A queen takes a knight, that's a lot of points gained. So pawn g7 takes queen f6. And now comes rook e2, g2, check, king goes to h8, and the bishop b2 takes f6, checkmate. So it will have better to lose some points by taking the bishop on b2 with the rook on b8, after which queen takes the rook. But the best is not to think in points, but in possibilities and situations. Here we see another attack on g7. This is also a typical attack. White plays the pawn to f6 and threatens to checkmate it with the queen on g7. On the next move, black can only prevent this by playing g7, g6. Which white plays is queen to h6. And the checkmate on g7 is no longer preventable. At least if black has no counter-attack with check moves, because then white must first answer those moves. And to end this video, I will give some examples of checkmating at the beginning of the game. White starts with e2, e4, taking possession of the center. Black decides to attack the center pawn and plays c7, c6. White now also takes possession of the center with his d-turn, d2, d4, after which black takes attacks the e-pawn with d7, d5. White continues to develop his pieces, and to defend the e-pawn he plays knight bishop 1, c3. Black now eliminates the e-pawn, d5 takes e4, and white takes that pawn with knight c3 takes e4. Black now wants to develop his knight, but normally you play the knight to c6, but there is now a pawn there, so he plays knight to d7, knight b8, d7. And white now sees a possible mean trap and plays queen d1, e2. Black does not see the danger and develops another piece. Now he attacks the white knight on e4 because he does not want white to control the center. That's a good strategy in itself, but you should always look at what else is happening on the board. For example, the white queen is on the e file and indirectly threatens the black king. But black plays 5 knight g8 to f6, and you may have already seen it, but if not, white now plays knight e4, d6, stickmate. And so there are 1,000 of variations to think and play. With the last example in this video, I show you how to use a combination of two typical tactics. On the one hand the double check, and on the other hand the discovery check. In another video we will show more of those basic tactics. White starts with e2, e4 again. Black answers with e7, e5. Both players want the center, but white immediately attacks the black center pawn with f2, f4. Actually, white sacrificed the f pawn. We call this a gambit, and because it happens on the king's side, we call it the king's gambit. Black accepts and captures the pawn on f4. e5 takes f4. Black now threatens to give check with his queen on h4 and thus destroys the white's king's position. That is why white plays knight f3. Black continues to attack the white e-pawn and plays d7, d5. And white continues to develop his pieces by knight b1, c3. Black captures the e-pawn and white captures the black pawn with his knight. d5 takes e4, knight c3 takes e4. Black wants to capture the knight on f3 because this protects the h4 square. After capturing the knight, the black queen can move to h4 and make things very difficult for white. The reason is that by playing the f-pawn, the king is not well protected anymore. However, white plays 6 queen d1, e2. And when we look at this position calmly, we see that the queen is again on the black king's line and that the king is not protected in any way. But black is busy with his attack. When he has the knight on f3, the queen can give check on h4, and when white then plays g3, he captures that pawn with f4 takes g3, well, many possibilities. Hence this example, because it shows very well that you should always look carefully not only on your possible moves and your plan, but also what moves your opponent can make and what his possibilities are. In this case, black did not do this and continued his attack and thus captured the knight on f3. Bishop g4 takes knight f3. And then follows knight e4 to f6, checkmate. And now when we look at the diagram, we see that the black can capture the check-giving queen with his bishop f3 take queen e2, or the check-giving knight with knight from j8 takes knight f6, or with the queen d8 takes knight f6, but he cannot capture both check-giving pieces with a single move. And that's the power of a double check. So thanks for watching and have fun playing chess, and see you maybe next time in our gallery center in Da Nang or on a video.